Talk Radio 702.
All right, all sorts of things. I mean, we're talking about brands, we're talking about trends for 2013. 2013 is halfway through, so I guess that there's a bleed into 2014. But joining us in the studio is the Chief Executive Officer of the Ornico Group, and that is Oresti Patricios. And Oresti, thanks very much indeed for joining us. I can remember years ago when a trend forecaster was something exotic, like, a green man or something like that. Nowadays, every second person is a trend forecaster, but there is a massive skill to it. I listened to Dion Chang, and I really think that he's reinvented himself. And the care that he goes to, I think is phenomenal. You've got Lee Edelcourt, and of course the one that stuck in my mind was the girl who was staying across the road at the Hilton Hotel and was so scared by the crime in South Africa that she needed a limo to take her across the road to our old studios that were on. I thought her name is Faith Popcorn.
Faith Popcorn.
That's right. And she said that I forecast trends. We look in the gutters of New York. We look in the sewers of New Orleans. And I thought, and this is a glamorous job? I don't think so. But actually, that really is what you're talking about, the need for brands to tune into trends at least once a year.
Absolutely. And I think we get it from because we monitor the media, but we do walk the streets every so often.
Oh, do you?
Yeah. In fact, about 3-4 weeks ago, we were walking the streets of Yeovil, in fact. And what were
you looking for, Oresti?
Yes, Andy. And it was kind of quite interesting because you kind of walk past there, and it was a Sunday afternoon, and you had the FNB ATM, and there was thousands of people in a queue waiting to get to the ATM. You look on the other side, and there's Capitec, and Capitec is open, and you think it's great service, and what's happening? Why is there a huge queue on the one end and Capitec empty? Well, obviously, from our perspective, Capitec is efficient, it's organised, it's more up to date. And kind of talking to the people, there were some really obvious things that came out of it. Number one is, remember, a lot of them are expats, they Nigerians, Zimbabweans, and some of the things they felt was, number one is Capitec's a new bank. We trust FNB because FNB has been there for a while. The other thing that came out of it was, when you're going to buy something at a bar or whatever, and you pull out a Capitec card or you pull out an FNB, there's a status in terms of pulling out that FNB, which is kind of quite interesting from our perspective. And thirdly, the technology that FNB had, that they could actually move the money across Africa into their homes. And we found that very, very interesting.
Steve has been doing his job.
Yeah. Steve has.
Very, very interesting. But you don't pick up things, or do you?
Oh,
you don't look at detritus in the streets or something.
No.
Count the wrappers.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm interested because here we are, as Jenny says, in the middle of the year talking trends. That in itself is unusual. Perhaps there's a trend now to have trends in the middle of the year. But normally in January we get bombarded with emails from different advertising agencies and different strategic consultancies saying these are the things to watch out for this coming year. And I always look at them with a little bit of suspicion and cynicism, quite contrary to my normal character, as you know. And I think to myself, how many incidences of a particular behavior or a particular change do you need before it becomes a trend? And do we ever confuse aberrations with trends?
Well, it could be. You remember that there's as Dave Duarte says, there's trifles, there's trends, and there's truths. And how do you define between the between the three? You do kind of get those trifles that happen to come about, like some of the internet money that was happening a few years ago. Although there are certain truths, and that's a human value at the end of the day. Truths are human values. They're there forever. And the reality is, how do you identify the trend, as you said, Andy? And I think it's something that's a little bit more long-lasting. At the end of the day, we're all social beings. What are the trends for being social beings? Getting onto Twitter and Facebook is just another tool that helps that values that we have of being social beings into a bit of a trend.
So if I'm a marketing director and my products are fast-moving consumer goods, the kind of things you see on pick-and-pay shelves and sell in large volumes, what current trends that I might not have identified would you alert me to as a result of your research?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, and remember that there's a lot of fragmentation. If you go back to the 50s where there was there was a rock and rollers, you kind of had the rock and rollers and the geeks. So it was kind of easy to, and then as the times kind of moved on, you had the hippies, the rock and rollers and the geeks. Now you're going much at the moment, and you have rock and rollers. You still have some of those around if you kind of look very carefully. Hippies definitely.
Yes, but they're all having knee replacements now.
Absolutely. But then you have your hipsters and you have your hip hoppers and so there's all those tribes that you've got to have a look at. And the trend doesn't necessarily mean it just sticks to one of those trends. And we each move in and out of each of those trends. I'll give you an example. Status has always been a trend, but how has that status moved on in terms of society today? So if you have a beautiful car, that's a status. But also if you're helping the community, that's also a bit of a status symbol. Having a good education is status. So it's not the traditional way that you kind of look at status.
Well, I suppose the underlying motivation would change, because your motivation for buying a flash car is to demonstrate your status. You may achieve status by helping out in the community, but that wasn't your motivation. Your motivation was more altruistic. It was to help. And if you achieve status as an outcome, surely that's a different trend to the one that says I achieve my status by having the right bank card in my wallet or the right car in my drive.
No, absolutely. It is a different feel, an emotion. But in reality, you do really feel good if you're helping somebody. So it is
So the manifestation of status is changing.
Yeah.
Even to the point where there are concepts like inverse snobbery, where wealthy people buy down on terms of price to demonstrate that they don't need the visual status, and therefore it is this what they call inverse snobbery.
I want to ask you a question, but it's related to an ad, and I don't know whether I've got hold of the wrong end of the stick. But I was thinking of two lots of advertising, and one of them is George Clooney and Nespresso. And now there's a Nespresso shop in Sandton City. It's bulging. And I actually think that is a trend, but I don't know whether it's a trend or a fashion, because I don't think that there is a decent kitchen in the whole of 702 land that actually doesn't have a Nespresso machine in it, because suddenly everybody is doing Nespresso, or at least the equivalent of. Maybe it's not a Nespresso itself, but certainly, your little espresso at the end of a meal. Now, is that a fashion or is it a trend? Because I think it's to do with home entertaining. I'm putting this badly, aren't I?
No.
I think that there is a difference to be made between something short-lived like fashion, which is what you were talking about, and something that is a sort of a broad stream leading to something else. And I think if there's a broad stream with that, I would have said it's home entertaining. Am I right, or have I got you wrong?
Fashion is a bit of a trend, though.
Yeah, but it is.
But Jen, you mentioned Faith Popcorn earlier, and
Yes.
one of her classic trends was cocooning,
Yes.
which is her term for exactly what you're talking about,
Precisely.
which is rather than go out, let's eat in and entertain in.
Exactly. And one of the things is, I think people are saying, why should I go to a second-rate restaurant when I can actually cook better in my own home? Never mind that you might take, 5 hours or 10 hours to do something, but it's the whole thing. And I do think she actually did invent cocooning, and I think she was right.
Yeah, absolutely. But I also think, excuse me, coffee. The coffee culture, specifically in South Africa, has grown as a trend. And
Yes.
Looking for beautiful coffee shops with fantastic coffee, specifically African coffee, is becoming a trend. It was a trend in Australia. It's becoming a trend here. And you can go to coffee shops in town. You can go to coffee shops in Braamfontein, and so that whole Nespresso thing has kind of followed out from that.
All right, we're going to take a short break. So we are chatting to Oresti Patricios, and he's the Chief Executive Officer of the Ornico Group, and we're talking about brand trends for 2013. And Andy, I know you've got about 20 gazillion questions to ask. So have I, of course, some more relevant than others.
Well, I would just like to hear Oresti's opinion on what is the one trend that has emerged, say, in the last 12 months, which has the potential not to fizzle out in trendiness, but to become mainstream a little down the line. We've spoken about status, but status has kind of been around a while, as you rightly said yourself.
Branded government. Branded government, yeah. In
Tell
terms
us
of,
more.
Yeah. I think governments have got... they don't have enough money to be able to do all the things that they need to do. So Outsurance and 702 have done a fantastic job of doing branded government.
I see what you mean. Yes,
yeah.
Okay.
And I think this trend, I mean, if you're looking around the world, I mean, governments actually have a huge issue with how do they distribute their cash, and specifically in the way that the economies are going currently, is branded government could be a...
Because in the UK, David Cameron talks about big society, which is basically his way of saying that his party's view is that society should take on the main role of delivering services, and government should be as small as possible.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what you're saying, is that the private sector takes over healthcare and policing and insurance and everything else.
Yeah.
Or at least it's a partnership,
Yes.
or an alleged partnership.
Definitely a partnership. And at the end of the day, I mean, we've seen how Outsurance has done an absolutely superb job that the city of Joburg probably couldn't have done as quickly.
Yes.
Yeah.
The divergent trends between emerging markets and developed markets, surely these have got to be affected in different ways by big brands for a market like South Africa, as opposed to a market like, for instance, the UK, a very sophisticated market and an emerging market.
Yeah, and specifically if you're looking at Nigeria and the UK, let's say, for instance, I mean, there's an ad, a fantastic ad for Close-Up. And I mean, you kind of see a lot of the times in Nigeria are very, very passionate Nigerians. And they love their country. So you see a lot of the stuff, I mean, like Close-Up is all about Nigeria and Niger. So it's about Nigeria. There's Guinness beer. Guinness beer, if you see the ads anywhere else, are quite different to the ones in Nigeria. Guinness beer in Nigeria is all about love Niger and love Nigeria.
Huge patriotism.
Yeah, huge patriotism in Nigeria.
And any other trends that, because I suppose the common understanding is that as we move up Maslow's hierarchy and people tend to be more comfortable at the top in first world societies, are there signs that South Africa is following the same progression?
In terms of particular niches, yes. We do follow a lot of the first world trends in certain niches, but again, also within the developing economies, again, social networking, being able to purchase online purchases in Nigeria. Again, they've got fantastic Amazon companies that actually do fantastic jobs from that perspective.
And things like sustainability and choosing brands on the basis of the declared values of the company that makes the brands. Is that sort of stuff emerging here yet? Because it's quite big in the first world.
Yeah, I mean, in Africa specifically, and I'm going to talk about Africa, they do see, unfortunately, they see foreign brands as much more, much better than local brands, which is really quite sad to see that, and specifically in North Africa, more than Sub-Saharan Africa. And I think our jobs as marketers is to actually get African brands to really be perceived amongst the consumer, that they are valuable brands.
Just a couple of final questions for you, because we've got to go to heroes and zeros. But are you going around to different companies doing a specific talk on emerging trends?
We do a talk. I do it every two to 3 months. But I don't go to companies. I mean, companies...
They come to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
My other question, well, it's not a question really, but I've got a question on the screen here. Jenny, this comes from Annie. Jenny, what does Andy look like? He sounds like Professor Higgins. Love his voice. Annie. P.S. Do you have a photo? Could you describe Andy for Annie?
Is that the time? I must admit.
Well, Yeah.
Careful. I know where you live.
I'll leave it to you, Jenny.
Oh, come on. All right, Annie, we want you to go to the Ad Feature Facebook page. I mean, I've got somebody who is Greek and scared. I mean, the two don't go together. But I mean, you obviously put the mockers on him, but Annie,
much
go to the
taller than
Ad. Yeah, he is. He's taller than everyone. Send Annie, go along to the Ad Feature Facebook page, and there you'll see a lovely recent photograph of Andy. And
prepare for disappointment.
No. I mean, the voice does everything. So, Oresti, thank you so much for joining us. Really, really interesting discussion. Chief Executive Officer of the Ornico Group.
Thank you.